Hello viewers and welcome to Economics 101. Now the year 2024 has started on a high note in the economic front with the Finance Minister Professor Mthuli Ncube fine-tuning the 2024 national budget. Zimbabwe, like any other global economy, has not been spared to the rise in inflation that has seen global banks tightening monetary policies and raising interest rates to curb the soaring prices. The Zimbabwean industry has not also been spared by the reeling economic sanctions that has seen some industries experience problems. Now, my name is Kurtley Gwendi, and in studio today on Economics 101, we are joined by a business leader, Mr. Christopher Mgaga, who is also the Chief Executive Officer of the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce, to discuss the 2024 economic year and see how best the government, as well as other stakeholders, can maintain a positive growth in the economy. Now, no stranger to your screens here on a ZBC TV, and indeed a big player with regards to both the government and the private sector. Mr. Chris, welcome to the show.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Now, very succinctly, perhaps you can share with us your view as someone who is also very much ingrained within issues to do with the economy. How best can you describe the current status quo with the Zimbabwean economy?
Yeah, well, it's quite a very promising year, definitely coming from the private sector. The headwinds are there. If you get to look at the last quarter of 2023, getting into this year, which is 2024, we certainly faced quite a plethora of challenges which had militated against the prospects of private sector growth and development, and in the process also impacting on GDP growth. But if you look at the numbers from the World Bank recently, Zimbabwe headline GDP growth expected to grow around 3.5% annualized, which, if you were to follow most of the economies within the region, is not a bad figure by any stretch of imagination. But we have resident challenges we believe through government and interactions, through lobbying and coordination, we should be able to solve some of the problems, which ranges from obviously the power shortages. You look at the current volatility itself, you look at the interest rate regime itself, you look at the degree and intensity of informality in the economy. These are the threats which we believe are at the top of our target.
Absolutely. And recently we have been talking about such statistics, as you've said, that are looking at the gross domestic product being projected to grow. But we want to focus a little bit on the value chain processing, which is directing retailers to purchase goods only from wholesalers. Now, that's really become a topic of interest. And what is the position on this matter?
Yeah, definitely. I think through a delegated piece of legislation, we had a policy coming through the revenue agents, which is the tax agent ZIMRA, pushing for the value chain sanitization, as it is called. But obviously, coming from private sector, knowing the dynamics and complexities around an economy, we certainly didn't feel like it was a good move, knowing fully well that an economy is not a linear animal where you wake up pushing producers to go straight to wholesalers before they even approach the retailers. And in the process, we'd seen the Treasury taking a backseat and somehow listening to our concerns. So the position as I speak to you right now is the Treasury is looking closely on the policy measures they introduced, some of them which we believe are certainly not proper or possibly healthy for the industry to grow and develop. But what is more significant is any policy move to do with industry should be interpreted on the context, or rather in the context of the Zimbabwe National Industrialization Development Plan, of which yesterday we had an Indaba, quite a very successful one, with different stakeholders on how we can grow the industry of Zimbabwe without using short-termistic interventions to deal with a long-term problem. So overall, I think I will read much into the ZNAIDP, which is the Zimbabwe National Industrial Development Program, more than I'll look at just short-term measures like what had been introduced for the past week, which had caused furor in the market.
Okay, well, definitely, and appreciating that there has been dialogue happening and conversation, discourse that is advancing the industry itself. Please do give us a little bit about perhaps the resolutions that did come out outside of what you've just mentioned from this Indaba that is seemingly progressing with regards to industry itself.
I think you appreciate that Zimbabwe, we are working with Vision 2030, where the target is clear to push the economy to an upper middle income economy, of which an upper middle income economy, we are looking or interpreting an economy where the gross national product is ranging between around 4,000 US dollars to 12,000 per year. We have to have that as a context in our minds. So how do we walk that road? To walk a road of getting to that vision, you need different policy documents, of which the Zimbabwe National Industrial Development Plan itself, it's also a blueprint to use to achieve that.
Yes, all right, and most definitely, let's perhaps interrogate a little bit of what's going on with regards to the 2024 national budget that was just announced with regards to what Professor Mthuli Ncube was speaking about. One of the key issues that he then fine-tuned within the January 2024 period was the issue to do with taxes, and perhaps there were different reactions and acceptances, some denials from the general Zimbabwean. But there were a number of changes to this 2024 national budget. What was the reason for these changes?
I think we can see differences. We can also interpret the problem differently. But what is most significant is to stick to the 2024 budget, which was announced November last year. Because when a plan of action is presented before the parliament to say this is how we are going to drive the economy in terms of revenue generation and expenditure, we need to stick to it. So the policy measures you are referring to, taxation measures, are obviously like an amendment to an already existing budget, which was announced in 2023, for raising for 2024. And let me hasten to say it's important as a nation to have an appreciation that when we are driving an economic agenda, the last thing we should try to attempt to rely on is the taxation instrument, knowing fully well that in Zimbabwe we have a lot of corporate tombstones who could not make it during the COVID. It's not only human beings who lost life, but even companies.
Oh, yes.
So how do we try to revive the industry post-COVID, of which taxation cannot be one of the routes? We can say it's a reliable route to grow the industry. We don't know a country which has taken itself out of poverty, and Zimbabwe cannot be an exception on that. So our plea remains, if ever we are to use taxation as a policy, let it be a policy to redistribute resources, not taxation to generate revenue to balance government accounts.
Oh, yes.
What is better to balance the accounts while these corporate tombstones are on the increase in the graveyard of corporates? So we need to take note of that.
All right. So as a business leader yourself, can you say there are actual practical measures with regards to these taxation processes regarding the fact that many salary brackets are not necessarily going to be well accepted of some of these tax brackets that are being announced? How best do we then revise that and perhaps make it more privy to the everyday Zimbabwean, some of these tax policies that have been announced?
Yeah, I think we can't maybe just debate looking at taxation because the whole economy is bigger than that. And our message remains clear that an economy cannot tax itself out of its economic challenges. What is important is for us to continue having the engagements we are having to say what type of a taxation head do we need to drive economic growth, not to raise revenue. So if the commitment is to manage to pay salaries, be it for civil servants or what, then it's a wrong commitment. The commitment should be to broaden the whole income base so that any type of tax you introduce in future then can be having an impact going forward.
But ultimately, before we go for a short break, doesn't this raising of salaries also re-inject, you were talking about distribution back into the economy, raising salaries means that the everyday individual will then spend more money within supporting some of the small to medium enterprises and some huge enterprises. How then does that matrix then balance with regards to not distributing money back?
Yeah, you don't tax or you don't raise a salary for you to increase an economy. The wage adjustment or upward adjustment of wage, it's a result of economic prosperity. So if you increase the salary of someone when the economy is under pressure, what you're just doing is to increase the capacity of that person to import goods from abroad, since there will be nothing to buy from here. So you can't use that. What's more important, obviously, like I'm saying, is consistency and certainty of policy. Once you introduce policies which speak into the future without having to tinker with them, then you will know we are doing well. The best economist in this world actually is not even you and me, it's our mothers. Your mother at home will never at one point try to cook sadza which is beyond the populace, or rather the size of the family, they know I earn $400 per month, and this is how I'm going to spend this money.
Sizable amounts as we
That's
go.
what economics is about, and we expect to behave that way also going forward.
Absolutely.
Especially as we talk policy issues.
A very, very succinct analogy there from Mr. Chris Mugaga, taking a look at all things to do with our current status quo here in Zimbabwe's economy. And we'll take a short break, a quick break here on Economics 101. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Thank you very much for staying with us here on Economics 101. Yes, this is the second segment. We are very much excited to be hosting in studio Mr. Christopher Mugaga, who is a business leader as well as the Chief Executive Officer of the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce, to discuss the 2024 economic year as well as to interrogate issues to do with the Zimbabwean economy as we begin the year. Now, as a commerce player yourself, Mr. Christopher Mugaga, perhaps do you believe that the measures that have been put in place are conducive for economic growth? And we're talking about the measures that we were just recently interrogating here, that is to do with the issue of the taxation processes as well as some of the fine-tuning that has been done within the 2024 national budget.
Yeah, if you were to have an honest opinion, obviously, I would say this: the Zimbabwe National Industrial Plan, which I just spoke about. It's a very noble intervention to the economy on its way, which is running up to 2030. The clamor, the core to make sure that the policy certainty is defined cannot be substituted. So when you're understanding or trying to analyze whether the policies are good or not for the economy, the first rule of thumb is you don't put policies overnight to expect them to have an impact in the next 48 hours. So policies, by nature, what makes them good policies, firstly, is the level of research you take before implementing them. Secondly, the level of mobilizing views before you even consider them. And then you also look at what we call a case of a dual economy. Because when you talk dual economy, a policy can be good for the capitalists, but for the majority who are struggling, then they'll feel the impact. So for you to have a very solid definition of what a good policy is, you measure it through its impact. But our clarion call and our story remains: don't implement a policy just to deal with a headache. Try to understand the fundamental challenge which is driving a headache you're having, because a headache is a symptom. But the moment you somehow capitalize or put a lot of effort in trying to deal with the symptoms you see in the market, then you'll be losing the cardinal map or the point as a pilot of a plane. And if you do that, definitely you will miss even on the airport you're supposed to be landing on.
All right. So ultimately, to answer my question, you are simply saying that perhaps some of the issues that are being dealt with prematurely?
Not only prematurely, but also in a very short-termistic spirit.
Okay.
Because when there's an economic challenge taking place today, sometimes you don't necessarily have to respond to it. Time and effectiveness of that policy might define whether it's a bad or a good policy.
Okay.
But the moment then we panic every time we come up with a policy, Zimbabwe, a unique economy where you see the informal sector quite very domineering. And to put any policy measure, including the taxation policy, you would then have to study over a medium to long-term period the impact of your policies. But if we enter a zone where time and again we see an economic malice, mischief in the economy, then we want to deal with it. We will not win it.
Okay.
The route to achieving sustainability in the economy is to work with market forces, respect them, adhere to them, and also to increase production. As long as the production or manufacturing is weaker or not quite significant, challenges we are raising right now will continue somehow dogging on our doorsteps. That's what we need to deal with.
Oh yes, and quite fascinating you've said that, because you did mention the informal sector, and we are interrogating your words, which were last year's words, where you were said on record and captured on record to be supporting government's policy to destroy all illicit goods, especially cigarettes. And how important is this kind of move to protect local industry? And perhaps tell us the idea behind that when you were supporting that government move.
Yeah, I mean, look, any economy, be it United States of America, be it Latin American economies, for it to grow itself, you need to look at border management. Because once you have counterfeit, substandard goods flooding the market, it somehow usurps the capacity or potential of your industry to grow. And that is one of the problems we are having at the moment, the porosity of Zimbabwean borders. Sometimes we even push figures and determine to say we are having 7.5, 7.8 billion worth of imports. But if you look closely, possibly the import bill should be beyond that figure, because you've got on average 2.5 to 3 billion of imports which are not accounted for, but are flowing into the economy. And in the process, then when you make policies, you'll be losing it because your statistics is already distorted. And in the process, then the industry will be the suffer. If you see how the informal economy is growing in leaps and bounds, try to correlate it with the import bill of the country, you can certainly see that what is funding the informality in the economy is beyond what we are accounting for. Hence, that's why we call it informality. So the day we wake up and understand not only cigarettes, but many products which are passing through our borders without paying even taxes, then we will know that we are having a bigger challenge, and it needs to be stemmed out as a matter of urgency on its own.
Okay, so you are still lobbying for that. You still have the same stance. You are still in the same position of pushing for that. With an appreciation of that, perhaps generally you can just forecast to us, how are you seeing the general landscape of the Zimbabwean economy? Would you say we're on a positive growth trajectory, or we are 50-50, or we are actually on a negative as we forecast what is going to happen in the year 2024?
No, obviously, in terms of forecast, the juncture, we cannot necessarily be very bullish, but at the same time, we can't afford to be pessimistic, given also the rains are with us. You look at the quality of the labor resource we have as a country. You look around most economies in the region, they are also having challenges. The headwinds are quite felt across the board. It's not only Zimbabwe, but obviously as a country, we then need to look at factors or threats which are quite existential in our economy, including the exchange rate volatility. It's a serious issue we need to deal with. The inflation threat, but inflation is also generated through exchange rate depreciation, which we had witnessed of late. Then I spoke about informality. Informality is not a small medium business. It's an unwanted economy, but it's a result of deindustrialization.
And where would you stagger the percentage of business and gross domestic product that comes out of this sector in particular?
No, of course, when you look at informality, quite a lot of money. Some figures are almost thrown 3 billion of money, which is unbanked and flowing within the informality. It's also one of the biggest employers right now in this economy, which is the reason why even Zimstans, when they release their unemployment statistics, you will see when they talk of informal employment, our unemployment rate is actually lower than most countries in the region, not necessarily because there are jobs, but because most people are now relying on informality for their daily livelihoods. So it can tell you that the over-reliance on informality is quite high. But the risk of informality, one, it stands on industrialization.
Yes.
It stands on innovation. Because with informality, you can't protect the intellectual property rights of individuals who are in business, be it patents, be it copyrights, and all the facets you can think of. Informality itself, it also tends to evade and avoid paying tax, which means even government projects themselves will be compromised going into the year. And government definitely working together with us as private sector, we need a game plan to deal with this. Every country in the world, but Africa in particular, we have got informality. We have got informal markets.
On that particular note, speaking of informality, formally we want to take a quick break here on Economics 101, as we are going to be getting into the thrilling conversation with Mr. Chris Mugaga, the third and final segment coming up next. This is Economics 101. Don't go anywhere. Thank you, viewers, for staying with us. This is indeed still Economics 101, where we are interrogating all things to do with industry and commerce. And in studio today, we are joined by Mr. Christopher Mugaga, who is the ZNCC CEO, as well as a business leader. Thank you so much for staying with us. Now, guided by your leadership, sir, we want to perhaps interrogate some of the issues around government talking about Zimbabwe being a conducive environment for foreign direct investment. Do you think the Zimbabwean industry is ready for investment, and do you think it has what it takes, well, with regards to some of the things we've seen, but going forward in 2024, do we have what it takes to attract investment?
Yeah, I think with the concerted effort coming from the investment agents in Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwe Investment Development Agents, which is ZIDA, working with the private sector, I'm quite very happy also to tell you that we've entered even memorandum of understanding with the investment body, where many times we are looking at investment with a different lens. Traditionally, when you talk of investment, it had always been foreign direct investment. How are the foreigners coming into Zimbabwe to invest? But now our major focus is also looking at domestic investment, because the soldiers who had weathered the storm for years are the local companies, more than you can even imagine. So when you talk of investment, we actually even not engaged in a wobbly thinking model where we think investment is just FDI. However, notwithstanding that, we continue pushing for policies where FDI is attracted into the country. But these policies come with a stable operating environment, stable in the sense of the exchange rate, in the sense of an interest rate path, which you can predict, stable also in the sense of peace, which you know Zimbabwe being one of the most peaceful countries in the world, or not only in Africa. All those things we need to tell a story.
So those are things that are factored in?
We need to factor in all that. The challenges, like any country in the world, we always have them. But what's more important is when we have challenges sometimes, is the capacity and the appetite to solve our challenges, which will make us some people will be respected across the world.
So the issue around, I just want to backtrack there, the issue around perhaps if we speak about the exchange rate vis-a-vis some of the variations between the US dollar and the RTGS ZWR, as some may call it. Is that a deal breaker for someone who perhaps wants to come in and invest in us? Because that's a variation or a variable that sometimes we can't escape, and perhaps some people have to interrogate further and make their decisions based off that.
Yeah, I think it's very significant to raise the bar and the message across that Zimbabwe, like Nigeria, Zimbabwe, like currently Kenya government, we're having exchange rate problems. It's the appetite to solve them which matters. Let me emphasize on that.
Yes.
Then there's also continuous talk of exchange rate, RTGS versus US dollar. It's important to also tell our people there's nothing called RTGS. Our currency, the name is Zimbabwe dollar. So it's also conflicting signal you send to the economy or to the market participants, or even to the investors when then they ask to understand how RTGS is a currency.
Some of the dynamics.
When RTGS is not a currency, it's just a platform to trade. It's a real-time gross settlement,
it's a
where you make settlement. You see?
Yes.
So we need also to send those messages to the world.
You heard it here, Zimbabwe.
Does have a currency called Zimbabwe dollar.
Oh yes, no, most definitely.
It's very significant. But exchange rate volatility is a problem, and we continue engaging even central government through the central bank to finding a lasting solution, knowing fully well that the exchange losses rather, which are generated by the depreciation of the local unit, are impacting negatively on the balance sheet of companies and even on planning, because when an investor comes, when they want their dividends, the question is, are they going to be compensated by a currency which is on a free fall or a stable currency? But we need a solution to that.
Oh yes. And recently, like you have mentioned, you were at the Indaba. Was there enough conversation around issues to do with investment in Zimbabwe? And is it a fertile ground as we speak at the moment with regards to the particular industry issue that we are speaking about? And how far are we going to go with regards to perhaps statistical projections of foreign direct investment that is coming into industry this year?
Indeed. If you look at the industrial policy we are talking about, I think our message had been clear, and we are agreeing with the Mother Minister of Industry and Commerce that we need to see foreign direct investment coming, if possible, at 10% of the total investment within the economy, just looking at the industry itself,
Okay.
in particular manufacturing sector.
So that's 10%.
Minimum as a benchmark
That's
in
good.
terms of total investment, 10% of total investment being focused on industry. You know very well that once you grow your manufacturing industry in an economy, the ability then for it to have spillover effects through backward and forward linkages, which will create jobs, becomes easy. Most economies in the world, looking at the West, looking at Latin America and all, you see the most reliable path to growth is industrialization through manufacturing. Once a country loses the manufacturing touch, it's very difficult for them then to compete on the world stage, be it when you are negotiating on African continental free trade area or even at World Trade Organization level. All those issues can only be solved by a nation which has capacity to produce for itself. And production comes with manufacturing. When you say manufacturing, it's a concept of just adding value from the production we had mentioned before.
Oh, yes, yes. And let's just backtrack a little bit. We know you do represent the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce, but we have platforms that have been on the empowerment trajectory with regards to seeking some of this investment and some of these international networks, as they call them. We have platforms like Zimtrade itself, Zida itself, as you've rightly cited. How well is the performance of those platforms, and perhaps is there enough that's being done, or are there more areas in which there could be improvement, as they say?
I think room for improvement, be it from Chamber of Commerce, any one of the bodies you are mentioning,
Yeah.
it will always be there. We can't say we've reached the ceiling of how we pitch. But a lot of work had been happening, both from Zimtrade and Zida, as we work together, marching forward to achieve that kind of an economy which we are envisaging. It's the members of the Chamber of Commerce who are also beneficiaries of these agencies, since the agents are set to assist or to empower the private sector. So the relationship is quite very cordial, it's strong, and we are part of them actually. We don't look at them as outsiders,
Oh, yes.
because we belong to those bodies.
All right.
And going forward, I think 2024, we want to see a coordinated approach where policy pronouncements will be marked by intense deliberations between the private sector and also the government. Just a few hours ago, you understand the tripartite negotiating forum. It took place where the three parties, the employers, the employees, and the government itself, agreed on a path to have a stable macroeconomic economy. And that macroeconomic economy can only be delivered if we agree that policy discourse can only be quality if and only when all players are brought into the same room to come up with a sustainable solution to the economic malaise, which to a certain extent we seem to be going through at the moment.
All right, absolutely. A symbiotic relationship between the employees, the employers, as well as the government will only get the economy going forward this 2024. These are words on Mr. Christopher Mgaga, who has joined us here on Economics 101 to discuss all things to do with the trajectory that Zimbabwe is experiencing with regards to its growth pattern as we get into 2024. Now, this indeed has been an exciting, insightful, as well as thrilling episode of Economics 101, where we have been interrogating all this and more. Please join us next week, same place, same time. Now, my name is Kurt Lee Gwindi from the crew behind the scenes, as well as all of us here at the Pocket Hill Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. It is a very good day, and God bless Zimbabwe.